The train horn didn't stop, and neither did she. It tore through the morning air, low and heavy, vibrating in my chest before I even saw the crossing. Red lights flashed hard against the pavement. Steel gates tried to drop, then jerked halfway, blocked. A white Lexus sat sideways across the tracks like it belonged there. That was the first thing that felt wrong. The second was her smile. She stood in front of the hood, phone up, talking to a growing crowd like this was her stage. "This crossing is unsafe," she said, voice sharp, controlled. "I'm protecting this neighborhood." The horn hit again, longer this time. Nobody laughed. Engines idled. Heat shimmered above the asphalt. Something bigger was already moving, and she couldn't hear it. I stepped out of my truck. Gravel crunched under my boots. The smell of hot brakes and diesel hung in the air. A freight line runs through this crossing. Timed schedules. Federal priority. None of that cared about HOA rules. But she kept talking. A man in a pickup leaned out his window and shouted for her to move. She ignored him. A woman pulled her kid back from the curb. No one crossed the tracks anymore. They just watched. That's when the radio on my dash crackled. Dispatch. I froze for half a second. I wasn't even on shift. Inbound freight, 5 minutes out, the voice said. Calm. Routine. Like nothing was wrong. But everything was wrong. I looked back at the crossing. She had 2 neighbors filming now. Phones up. Faces lit by screens. They thought this was a moment. They had no idea what was already set in motion. The rails started to hum. You don't hear it at first. It's more like a vibration under your feet. A warning most people miss. I didn't miss it. I'd grown up around this sound. My father taught me what it meant before I could drive. He used to say the tracks always tell you first. She wasn't listening. She stepped closer to the rails, still talking, still smiling. The gate arm scraped against the side of her car, stuck halfway down. That sound, plastic grinding against metal, cut through everything. It shouldn't have been stuck. That crossing is maintained under federal inspection. Which meant something had already been tampered with. I felt that before I confirmed it. My grip tightened around the truck door. Another horn blast rolled in, closer now. Not distant anymore. Real. Immediate. The crowd shifted. People backed up a step without realizing it. Instinct kicked in. Except for her. She stayed planted, like she'd decided this was a line she wouldn't move from. That's when my phone buzzed. Different call. Yard supervisor. I answered before the second ring. We've got a problem at your crossing, he said. I stared straight at the Lexus blocking both rails. I can see that. There was a pause on the line. Short. Heavy. Then he said something that changed everything. You're the closest certified operator we have right now. I looked down the track. I couldn't see the train yet. But I could feel it coming. And suddenly, this wasn't just her problem anymore. I did not answer right away. I just listened to the rails. That low vibration was stronger now, running through the soles of my boots and up my spine. 5 minutes was not a guess. It was a promise. I turned back to the crossing. She was still talking into her phone, pacing a few steps like she was hosting a show. People were nodding. Some even smiled. That felt off. Nobody should be calm with a live track behind them. The warning bell kept ringing, sharp and repetitive. It never stops unless something is wrong. I knew that. Most people did not. I stepped closer. The air felt hotter near the tracks, like the metal itself was breathing. You need to clear the crossing, I said. I kept my voice level. She looked at me like I had interrupted something important. "This is a community safety issue," she replied. "Smooth. Practiced. The trains come too fast." That was not how this worked. Speed is regulated. Signals are timed. Crossings are protected under federal code. None of that was optional. I glanced at her car again. The front tire was inches from the rail. Too close. Deliberate. The gate arm was wedged against the rear door, bent just enough to jam the mechanism. That did not happen by accident. Someone had forced it. I felt that detail settle in. She did not just block traffic. She altered a safety system. The horn sounded again, louder now. A few people flinched. Not her. She lifted her phone higher. "See," she said to the camera. "This is exactly what I mean." The crowd shifted behind her. A man stepped back onto the sidewalk. A woman grabbed her bag and moved further away. Instinct was catching up. I pulled my phone out and checked the line status. The signal ahead was still green. That meant the train had right of way. No automatic stop. No slow approach. Just schedule and steel. I felt my jaw tighten. Dispatch was still on my radio. "We cannot hold it," the voice said. "You know the protocol." I did. Freight does not stop unless there is a confirmed obstruction reported through the right channel. This was not in the system yet. Which meant the train was coming full speed for this stretch. I looked down the track again. Still nothing visible. But the hum had turned into a steady growl. The kind you feel before you see. My father used to call it the warning you cannot ignore. He spent 30 years on these lines. Taught me every signal, every sound. He also taught me one thing that stuck. The track does not care who you are. I took a slow breath. Diesel, heat, dust. The crossing lights flickered once, then steadied. That flicker should not have happened. Another sign something had been tampered with. I stepped around the front of her car, closer to the rail. The steel was warm under the morning sun. Warmer than it should be. I did the math in my head. Distance. Speed. Time. Less than 4 minutes now. I turned back to her. "You are standing on a federal crossing," I said. She tilted her head, like that word meant nothing. "And you are blocking a live line." Her smile did not change. That was the problem. She did not understand the system she was trying to control. And systems like this do not bend. They respond. I looked past her, down the track one more time. This time, I saw it. A small point of light, steady, growing. And that was when I knew exactly how this was going to unfold. The light was not a reflection. It held steady and grew larger with every second. I felt the rail hum deepen under my feet. That was no longer a warning. That was momentum. I looked back at her. She was still speaking, voice smooth, like she had rehearsed this moment. "They ignore our complaints," she said into her phone. "So I am forcing accountability." A few people behind her nodded again. That was the part that bothered me. Not the car. Not the gate. The confidence. It did not match reality. I stepped closer to the front of the Lexus. The hood was warm. The engine was still running. She had no intention of moving it. That detail locked in. The gate arm pressed harder against the rear door as the mechanism tried again to drop. It shuddered, then stopped. That system was fighting itself now. That should never happen. I crouched slightly and checked the base of the gate. The control box was scratched. Fresh marks. Someone had forced it open recently. I did not need to see inside to know it had been tampered with. The pattern was clear. She did not just block the crossing. She changed how it functioned. The horn came again. Louder. Closer. The sound bounced off the houses and came back distorted. People flinched this time. A man stepped off the curb and waved his arms. "Move the car," he shouted. She did not even turn. Her eyes stayed on her phone screen. That disconnect felt dangerous. I straightened and stepped back. My radio crackled again. "Distance check," dispatch said. I looked down the line. The light had doubled in size. "Under 3 minutes," I said. My voice sounded calm. It did not feel calm. The air carried a faint metallic scent now. Heated steel. It always shows up before the train breaks into view. I checked the signal mast beyond the crossing. Still green. Solid. That meant nothing had been reported through the official channel. Which meant the system believed the track was clear. That was the real problem. Systems like this do not guess. They rely on confirmed input. And right now, the input was wrong. I took a step toward her again. "You need to understand something," I said. She lowered her phone just enough to look at me. Annoyed. Not concerned. "This is not a neighborhood road," I said. "You do not control it." She gave a small smile. "We control what happens in our community," she said. That word again. Control. It sounded confident. It was completely misplaced. Behind her, someone whispered, "Is that the train?" Heads turned. The low growl had become a rolling thunder now. It filled the space between breaths. I glanced at the rails. They were vibrating visibly now. That only happens when the weight is close. Too close. I checked my watch. Less than 2 minutes. I could feel the timeline compressing. Every second mattered now. My phone buzzed again. "Yard supervisor." I answered without looking away from the track. "We have clearance for operator intervention," he said. That phrase landed hard. It meant the system was about to shift responsibility. From automatic control to human decision. I knew exactly what that meant. I looked back at the crossing one more time. The car. The gate. The crowd. Her. All of it locked in place like it could not be moved. But it would be. One way or another. I exhaled slowly and turned away from her. Toward the yard access road behind me. Because at this point, there was only one way to meet what was coming. I moved fast but not rushed. The gravel shifted under my boots as I cut across the edge of the road and headed toward the service path behind the crossing. The horn hit again, longer now, and it echoed through the trees like a warning that had already been ignored. I did not look back at first. I did not need to. I could feel the situation tightening behind me. 2 minutes had turned into something shorter. The air felt heavier. The kind of pressure that builds right before a system reacts. I reached the chain link gate that marked the yard access. It was locked, but not for me. My badge slid across the reader. A soft click. The gate released. That small sound felt louder than it should have. Inside, the ground changed from loose gravel to packed dirt and steel. The smell shifted too. Oil. Warm metal. A faint trace of ozone. That always meant active lines nearby. I picked up my pace. Behind me, the horn sounded again, closer, deeper. It carried a weight now. People at the crossing would feel it in their chest. That is when they usually realize. I glanced over my shoulder. Just a quick look. The crowd had moved. Back further. Not far enough, but enough to show the instinct had finally caught up. She was still there. Still in front of the car. Phone raised. That detail stuck with me. Not the danger. The denial of it. I turned forward again and pushed deeper into the yard. A line of idle freight cars sat on the side track, silent, waiting. Steel against steel. Stillness before motion. I passed them without slowing. The service road curved toward the main line junction. That was where I needed to be. My radio crackled again. "Distance check," dispatch said. I did not stop moving. "Under 90 seconds, I replied. My voice stayed even. Years of training do that. Inside, everything was calculating. Speed. Distance. Response time. I reached the junction point and saw the lead unit. The locomotive idled on the siding, low rumble steady, like a heart waiting to be told to beat faster. Heat rose from the engine housing. The metal skin shimmered under the sun. This was my access point. I climbed the steps 2 at a time. My hand wrapped around the rail. Warm. Solid. Familiar. Inside the cab, the air was thick with the smell of diesel and worn leather. Controls sat exactly where they always had. Nothing here was uncertain. That contrast hit hard. Outside, chaos. Inside, precision. I slid into the seat and keyed the radio. "Operator on board," I said. A short pause. Then dispatch responded. "You have conditional control." That phrase mattered. It meant I could act within federal protocol. Not to stop the system, but to guide it. I looked through the front glass. The track stretched straight toward the crossing. No obstruction visible from this angle yet. Just distance shrinking fast. I adjusted the throttle slightly. The engine responded with a deeper hum. Power building. Not aggressive. Controlled. The rails ahead began to sing louder. That sound always comes before motion becomes visible. I checked the signal panel. Still green. No override yet. That meant the train inbound had not been flagged. It was still running as scheduled. Which meant I had seconds, not minutes, to align everything. My hand hovered over the brake control. Not engaged. Not yet. Timing mattered more then. Force here. I leaned forward slightly, eyes locked down the line. The light from the approaching train was brighter now. No longer a dot. A presence. The horn sounded again, and this time it filled the cab completely. Close enough to feel. I exhaled slowly and tightened my grip on the controls. Because the next move would decide how this system responded. The engine beneath me shifted from idle to intent. A low surge rolled through the cab as the throttle responded to my touch. Not fast. Not yet. Just enough to wake the system. The horn from the inbound train cut through again, closer now, layered over my own engine's hum. 2 forces on the same line. That never feels normal. I leaned forward and watched the track. The crossing was still out of sight from this angle, hidden by the slight curve and a row of trees. But I could picture it exactly. The car. The gate. Her. Still standing there. That image stayed fixed. I checked the panel again. Signal still green. No override request had been logged. That meant the inbound train had no reason to slow. It was doing exactly what it was designed to do. And that was the problem. Systems do not question. They follow inputs. And the input was wrong. My radio crackled. "Operator, confirm visual on obstruction," dispatch said. I hesitated for half a second. Not because I did not know. Because of what it meant to say it out loud. "Confirmed obstruction at crossing," I said. My voice stayed even. That phrase triggered a chain inside the system. Not instant. Not dramatic. But real. Dispatch responded quickly. Routing alert sent. You have limited intervention authority. Limited. That word mattered. It meant I could not just stop everything. I had to work within the rules. The same rules she thought she could ignore. I adjusted the throttle again. A slight increase. The locomotive responded with a deeper vibration. Power building under control. The rails ahead began to sing louder. I could feel the tension through the seat now. The kind that builds when motion and resistance start to meet. I checked the distance marker on the track. Less than a mile. At that speed, that distance disappears fast. Seconds, not minutes. I wiped my hand across my palm. Sweat. Not fear. Focus. The kind that sharpens everything. I keyed the radio again. Inbound train speed? I asked. A short pause. Then the answer. 45 miles per hour and holding. That number landed heavy. At that speed, there is no sudden stop. Only managed deceleration. And that requires time. Time we did not have. I looked ahead again. The curve was opening now. The crossing would come into view any second. I eased the throttle slightly, balancing output and control. Not stopping. Not rushing. Just aligning. The horn from the inbound train hit again, and this time it sounded different. Urgent. Repeated. The operator on that train had seen something. Maybe the signal. Maybe the crowd. Maybe the obstruction. It did not matter which. It meant they were reacting. Finally. I leaned forward, eyes locked on the line. The trees broke just enough for me to see movement ahead. Small shapes. Cars. People. The crossing was there. And it was still blocked. My grip tightened on the control handle. Every instinct told me to cut power and brake hard. But instinct is not protocol. And protocol exists for a reason. I needed the right moment. Too early, and I would not slow enough. Too late, and I would lose control of the outcome. I checked the signal one more time. Still green. That flicker from earlier echoed in my head. Something had been altered. That meant the system might not behave exactly as expected. Another variable. I adjusted my posture, steadying my breathing. The engine roared a little stronger under me as the line straightened. The crossing was fully in view now. The Lexus. The bent gate. The crowd pulled back to the edges. And her. Still standing there, phone raised, like this was still under her control. That was the illusion. And it was about to break. I leaned into the controls, ready to act on the next signal change. Because the system was seconds away from deciding what happened next. The crossing filled the windshield now. No distance left to hide behind. The Lexus sat frozen across both rails, angled just enough to block everything. The gate arm trembled against the door, stuck, useless. The crowd had pulled back further. Faces tight. Phones still up. But no one stepped forward anymore. That shift mattered. They felt it now. I eased the throttle down a notch. The engine responded with a lower, heavier tone. Not stopping. Just controlling the push. The inbound horn blasted again, rapid now, not spaced. The other operator had eyes on the obstruction. That meant he was reacting, but at 45 miles per hour, reaction has limits. I leaned closer to the glass. Heat waves shimmered above the track. The rails vibrated hard enough to blur the edges. That only happens when mass is seconds away. I keyed the radio. Inbound, this is yard control. Obstruction confirmed. Initiate controlled reduction. Static answered first. Then a voice. Tight. Focused. Visual acquired. Reducing throttle. Good. But reduction is not stop. It is a calculation. I checked my panel again. Still green. That should not be happening. With a confirmed obstruction, the signal should have shifted. It did not. That flicker earlier came back to me. Something in the system was not reporting correctly. I felt that settle in. This was not just a bad decision at the crossing. It was a broken input. I scanned the signal relay indicators. One light pulsed faintly out of sync. Barely noticeable. But it should not be pulsing at all. That meant the circuit was compromised. Tampered. My jaw tightened. She had not just blocked a crossing. She had disrupted a control loop. I glanced back at her. She was still in the same spot. Phone up. Talking. The horn from the inbound train cut over her voice, drowning it out. She paused for a second. Just a second. Then she kept talking. That hesitation told me something. She finally heard it. But she still did not move. I pulled the radio closer. Dispatch, signal fault suspected at crossing. Manual correction required. A pause. Longer this time. Then the answer came through. You are cleared for manual override at your position. That was it. The shift. The system handing control to a human decision. I reached for the override panel. The cover was sealed. Standard protocol. My fingers pressed the release. A sharp click. The cover lifted. Inside, the manual control switches sat. Untouched. Rarely used. Only in moments like this. I flipped the first switch. The panel responded with a soft tone. The green signal ahead flickered once. Then steadied again. Not enough. I adjusted the brake pressure slightly. The locomotive resisted, slowing just enough to buy seconds. Seconds were everything now. I flipped the second switch. Another tone. This time deeper. The signal mast ahead hesitated. The green light dimmed for a fraction of a second. Then came back. That was wrong. It should have changed fully. The fault was deeper than one control. I exhaled slowly and recalculated. The inbound train was closer now. The light was no longer a point. It was a full beam, cutting through the air. I could see the outline of the lead unit behind it. Time was almost gone. I leaned into the panel and reached for the final override. The one that forces a system reset. It is not used lightly. It interrupts the entire sequence. But right now, the sequence was already broken. I looked back at the crossing one more time. The car. The gate. The crowd. Her. Still holding that phone like it mattered. I placed my hand on the final switch. Because once I pulled it, everything would change at once. My finger hovered for a fraction of a second, then I pulled the switch. The panel responded with a sharp tone that cut through the cab. Not loud, but final. The kind of sound that means a system just gave up control. The signal ahead flickered again. This time it did not recover right away. The green dimmed, pulsed, then dropped to dark for a split second. That was the break. I felt it more than saw it. The line had been forced out of its loop. I pushed the brake a little deeper, steady pressure, not a slam. The locomotive slowed just enough to stretch the next few seconds. Outside, the horn from the inbound train blasted again, longer, urgent, almost continuous now. That operator knew. He was reacting with everything the system allowed. But physics does not bend on command. I leaned forward, eyes locked on the signal mast. Waiting. The red light snapped on. Clean. Solid. No flicker. That was it. The system had reset. I keyed the radio instantly. Signal dropped to red. Confirm inbound response. Static, Then the voice came back. Tighter now. Acknowledged. Full reduction engaged. Good. That meant brakes were going in on his end. Still not instant. But it changed the outcome. I shifted my attention back to the crossing. The crowd had moved further back now. Several people had stepped onto the sidewalk, pulling others with them. A few phones lowered. Reality was cutting through the noise. The air felt different. Thicker. Charged. I looked at her. For the first time, she was not speaking. Her phone hung lower, just below her face. Her eyes were no longer on the screen. They were on the track. On the light. On the sound that was no longer abstract. That moment mattered. Recognition. But she still had not moved. I tightened my grip on the controls. Timing was still everything. I eased the throttle down further, balancing against the brake pressure. The locomotive responded with a controlled deceleration. No jerks. No sudden shifts. Just steady resistance. The rails screamed faintly now, a high-pitched edge layered over the deep rumble. That sound always comes when metal meets force and tries to hold. I checked the distance again. The inbound train was close enough to see the full front now. The light was blinding. The outline of the cab behind it was clear. It was slowing. I could see it in the subtle change of motion. Not fast enough to feel safe. But enough to matter. I keyed the radio again. Maintain reduction. Crossing still obstructed. My voice stayed level. That was training. Inside, everything was narrowed to seconds and feet. I glanced at the override panel. The switches held steady. No flicker. The system was now following the new input. That was the only thing keeping this from escalating. I looked back at her again. She took one small step backward. Then stopped. Like she was unsure which direction mattered more. The crowd shifted again. Someone shouted something I could not make out. It did not matter. The sound of steel and air had taken over. I leaned forward slightly, eyes tracking both the inbound train and the crossing at the same time. Calculating the remaining distance. The closing speed. The margin left. It was thin. Too thin for comfort. But it was there. Barely. I adjusted the brake pressure one more time, fine-tuning the resistance. Every inch counted now. Every fraction of a second. The horn blasted again, right on top of us now, filling the entire space with sound. And for the first time since this started, she looked like she might actually move. She finally stepped back, but not far enough. Just one foot, then another, like she was testing the ground instead of escaping it. The horn roared again, so loud now it flattened every other sound. You could not ignore it anymore. The air itself seemed to shake. I watched her eyes. They were locked on the light now. Not her phone. Not the crowd. The light. That was the first real shift. But the car was still there. Blocking both rails. Engine still running. Gate still jammed. The system had slowed the train, but it had not stopped it. Not yet. I adjusted the brake pressure again, steady and controlled. The locomotive pushed back under me, resisting its own motion. That resistance felt like time stretching, but only by inches. I checked the distance. Too close. Still too close. The inbound train filled more of the track now, its outline sharp, its movement heavy but slowing. Not enough for comfort. Just enough for a chance. I keyed the radio. Status, I said. No extra words. The answer came quick. Reduction holding. Speed decreasing. I watched the wheels in my mind. Steel against steel. Heat building. Friction doing its job. But friction has limits. I looked back at the crossing. The crowd had moved further now, pressing against the sidewalk and the edge of the road. A man reached toward her, then stopped short. Nobody wanted to step onto the track anymore. That line had become real. She took another step back. This time faster. Her phone dropped to her side. The screen still lit, still recording. That detail stuck. She had wanted control. Now she was reacting. I leaned forward, eyes tracking the exact position of the Lexus. Front tire still inches from the rail. That meant even if she moved, the car would not. And that was the real obstruction. I felt that shift in focus hit. It was never just her. It was the object she left behind. The horn blasted again, right on top of us, and the inbound train lurched slightly as braking force increased. I could see it now. The subtle dip. The weight transferring. That meant the operator had gone deeper into reduction. Good. But distance was still closing. I adjusted my own brake again, matching the change, keeping the line balanced. Too much on one side, and the response becomes unpredictable. I kept it steady. Controlled. Every movement small. Every correction deliberate. I glanced at the signal mast. Red held firm. No flicker. The override had locked in. That was the only stable piece in this moment. Everything else was still moving. I looked back at her again. She turned toward the car now. Finally. Her hand reached for the door handle. For a second, it looked like she might try to move it. But the angle was wrong. The gate was pressed too tight. The door would not open fully. That hesitation cost time. Seconds she did not have. The crowd shifted again. Someone shouted. Urgency now. No more calm voices. I leaned closer to the glass, tracking the exact gap between the inbound train and the crossing. Measuring it in my head. Feet. Not yards anymore. Feet. The margin was thin. Thinner than I wanted. But still there. Barely. I tightened my grip on the control and held the brake steady, resisting the urge to overcorrect. Because one wrong move now would erase that margin completely. The train bore down on the crossing, slower than before, but still carrying weight. Still carrying momentum. And she had just realized the car was not going anywhere. Her hand yanked at the door, but it barely moved an inch. The gate arm pressed harder against the frame, locking it in place. That detail hit her all at once. The car was not just blocking the track. It was trapped on it. The horn blasted again, so loud now it felt like it pushed the air itself. She stepped back, then forward again, unsure which direction mattered. That hesitation cost more time. I leaned forward in the cab, eyes fixed on the exact position of the front tire. Still inches from the rail. Still dead center in the path. I keyed the radio. Obstruction still active, I said. My voice stayed level, but everything inside was narrowing. The answer came fast. Reduction near maximum. We are losing margin. That word landed heavy. Margin. The small space between control and outcome. And it was shrinking. I adjusted the brake again, just enough to match the inbound change. The locomotive resisted, metal grinding softly under pressure. That sound meant friction was working, but it also meant heat was building. Heat changes everything. I kept my movements precise. No sudden shifts. No panic inputs. I looked back at her. She had both hands on the door now, pulling harder. The crowd behind her shouted, voices sharp, urgent. Someone moved closer, then stopped again. Nobody wanted to step onto the rail. That line had become absolute. I checked the signal mast again. Red held steady. No flicker. That was the only stable piece in this entire sequence. I leaned closer to the glass. The inbound train was right there now. The full front visible. The lights washed over the crossing, bright enough to erase shadows. I could see the operator through the glare, posture forward, focused. He was doing everything right. But even doing everything right does not guarantee the outcome. I measured the distance again. Feet. Single digits now. The margin was almost gone. I felt my grip tighten on the control handle. This was the moment where instinct tries to take over. To pull harder. To force a stop. But force is not how this system works. Control is. I kept the brake steady. Balanced. Every fraction mattered. She let go of the door and stepped back suddenly. That shift was sharp. Real. But the car did not move. That was the problem. Always the car. I glanced at the angle again. Front wheels slightly turned. Engine still on. Transmission probably still in park. That meant there was one option left. I keyed the radio quickly. If driver clears, vehicle still obstructing. Stand by. No answer came right away. There was no time for one. I leaned forward, eyes tracking the exact gap closing between steel and obstruction. The horn blasted again, right on top of us, filling everything with sound. The inbound train slowed, but not enough to feel safe. Not enough to stop before the crossing. I exhaled slowly and shifted my hand toward the secondary control. Not the brake. The auxiliary system. Rarely used. Only when precision alone is not enough. Because in that moment, I realized something critical. This was no longer about stopping in time. It was about what happened in the last few feet. My hand closed over the auxiliary control, fingers tightening just enough to feel the resistance. This was not a brake. Not a stop. This was a last layer correction built into the system for moments that did not follow the plan. I hesitated for half a second, then engaged it. A deep mechanical tone pulsed through the cab, different from everything before. Lower. Heavier. The locomotive responded with a subtle shift, like it was bracing itself. I kept my eyes forward. The gap between steel and obstruction was almost gone. The inbound train loomed across the entire windshield now, its motion slower but still relentless. The horn did not stop. It filled the air so completely that nothing else could exist beside it. I adjusted the brake one more time, matching the new resistance. Every movement was small. Exact. No room for error. I glanced at her. She had stepped fully away from the car now, hands empty, phone hanging at her side. Her eyes were wide, locked on the train, no longer on control, no longer on performance. That shift came too late. The crowd behind her had pulled back even further, bodies pressed against the edge of the road, some turning away, unable to watch. I leaned forward, measuring the final distance in inches. The front tire of the Lexus sat directly in line with the rail, unmoved, fixed. That was the anchor point. Everything revolved around that one detail. I keyed the radio, voice steady. Final approach. Obstruction unchanged. The response came immediately. Hold reduction. Maintain control. No extra words. None needed. I returned my focus to the track. The rails screamed now, a high, sharp sound layered over the deep rumble of mass slowing against force. That sound meant limits were being tested. I kept the auxiliary engaged, holding that extra resistance in place. The locomotive pushed back harder, absorbing energy, buying fractions of space. Fractions were all that remained. I watched the inbound train dip slightly again as braking force increased. The operator was pushing everything he could within protocol. I could see it in the motion. In the way the weight shifted forward. But the distance was still closing. Still not enough. I exhaled slowly and recalculated in real time. Speed reduced. Distance minimal. Outcome uncertain. I glanced at the signal mast one last time. Red held firm. That part was done. Now it was just physics and timing. I shifted my hand slightly on the control, maintaining steady pressure. No sudden moves. No panic. The system had to stay balanced through the final seconds. I looked back at the crossing. The car. The rail. The gap. Inches now. The kind of distance you cannot feel until it is gone. The horn hit again, right on top of us, and the entire scene compressed into a single moment. I tightened my grip and held the line steady, because whatever happened next would be decided in the space of a heartbeat. The moment stretched, then snapped into motion. The front of the inbound train dipped harder, braking force biting into the rails, metal screaming under pressure. The Lexus did not move. It could not. That single fact held everything in place. I kept the auxiliary engaged, holding that last layer of resistance steady. The locomotive under me pushed back, absorbing energy, buying inches. I watched the gap close. Inches turned into fractions. The horn was no longer a warning. It was constant. Unbroken. The kind of sound that fills your entire body. I leaned forward, eyes locked on the exact point where steel would meet obstruction. Then it happened. The inbound train shuddered again, a deeper drop, the weight transferring forward with full braking engaged. The motion changed. Slower. Still moving, but different. That difference mattered. I held the line steady, no adjustments, no panic inputs. The system had reached its limit. Now it was holding. I could see the front coupler clearly now, every detail sharp under the lights. The Lexus sat directly in front of it, unchanged. The gap was almost gone. Then the movement shifted again. Subtle. Barely visible. But real. The train was still advancing, but the rate had dropped to a crawl. Not stopped. Not yet. But no longer closing fast. I felt my grip tighten. This was the edge. The point where control either holds or fails. I kept the brake balanced, the auxiliary steady, every input locked in place. The rails screamed louder, a high, cutting sound layered over the deep rumble. That sound always means the system is at its threshold. I did not move. I did not breathe for a second. The front of the train crept forward, inches at a time. The Lexus filled the frame. The distance between them shrank to almost nothing. Then it stopped. Not suddenly. Not sharply. Just a final, controlled halt. The coupler rested inches from the front tire. No contact. No impact. Just space. Thin. Exact. I exhaled slowly, feeling the tension release from my grip. The horn cut off. Silence rushed in, heavy and unreal. The crowd did not move at first. Nobody spoke. The air felt different without the sound. I glanced at the signal mast. Red still held. Stable. The system had reset and held the line. I released the auxiliary control carefully, then eased the brake, keeping everything steady. No sudden changes. I looked back at her. She stood a few steps away from the car now, frozen, eyes fixed on the train that had stopped inches from where she had been standing. Her phone was still in her hand, screen glowing, but she was no longer recording. That part was over. I leaned back slightly in the seat, letting the moment settle. Everything had held. Every calculation. Every second. But as the silence settled in, one detail started to stand out more than anything else. The crossing system had not failed on its own. Silence held for a second longer than it should have. Then the world rushed back in. People started talking all at once, voices overlapping, sharp, confused, relieved. Someone laughed nervously. Someone else swore under their breath. The train sat motionless, inches from the car, its presence still massive, still dominant. I kept my hands on the controls, steady, letting the system settle before making any changes. The rails still hummed faintly, heat bleeding off from the friction. That sound fades slowly. It always does. I looked at the signal panel again. Red held firm, no flicker, no instability. The override had done more than stop the train. It had exposed the fault. I keyed the radio. Crossing secured. Obstruction still in place. My voice stayed even. The response came back quickly. Understood. Authorities en route. That part was expected. What mattered now was what came next. I glanced back at the crossing. She had not moved much. Just a few steps away from the car, like distance alone could change what had happened. Her shoulders were stiff. Her posture no longer confident. That shift was clear. The crowd had formed a loose circle now, keeping space between themselves and the tracks. No one stepped forward. Not yet. I eased the brakes slightly, just enough to hold position without strain. The locomotive responded with a low, steady hum. Controlled. Stable. I reached for the radio again, switching channels to maintenance. Signal fault confirmed at crossing control box, I said. Likely manual interference. There was a pause. Then a short reply. Copy that. Crew dispatching. I looked back toward the base of the gate. The scratches I saw earlier stood out more now. Fresh. Sharp. Not wear and tear. Intentional. That detail connected everything. The jammed arm. The flickering signal. The delayed system response. None of it was random. I leaned back slightly in the seat, letting the pattern settle into place. She had tried to control something she did not understand. And in doing that, she had broken a system designed to prevent exactly this moment. I watched as two people from the crowd approached her cautiously. One of them pointed at the car. The other gestured toward the train. Their movements were careful, measured. Nobody wanted to step too close. The space around the tracks had changed. It was no longer just part of the road. It was a boundary. I keyed the radio again. Inbound, hold position. Do not advance until clearance confirmed. The reply came back steady. Holding. Good. That kept everything locked where it needed to be. I looked once more at the crossing, at the car still sitting across both rails, at the gate arm pressed against it, at the control box that no longer matched the system it was supposed to support. The pieces were all there now. Clear. Undeniable. And as the sound of distant sirens started to cut through the air, one thing became certain. This was no longer just about a blocked crossing. The sirens grew louder, cutting clean through the fading hum of the rails. Blue and red light flickered across the side of the train, reflecting off steel and glass. The crowd shifted again, parting this time without being told. Authority changes the air fast. I kept my hand steady on the controls, holding everything exactly where it was. No movement. No risk. The train remained inches from the car, a line drawn in steel. Officers stepped out first, scanning the scene, eyes moving from the locomotive to the crossing, then to her. She did not speak. Not now. Her phone was still in her hand, but the screen had gone dark. That detail felt final. A second vehicle pulled up behind them. Maintenance. They moved straight to the control box at the base of the gate. One look was enough. I saw it in the way they paused. Then one of them opened the panel carefully. Inside, wires were shifted. Not cut. Not destroyed. Just moved enough to break the logic. That explained everything. The delayed signal. The failed drop. The flicker. It had not been a system failure. It had been interference. I keyed the radio one last time. Fault confirmed. Manual tampering at crossing control. The reply came back short. Understood. That was all that needed to be said. I eased the brakes slightly, just enough to keep the train stable while they worked. No sudden changes. The locomotive responded with a low, controlled hum. I watched as one of the officers approached her. Calm. Direct. No raised voice. Just clear questions. She answered at first, small gestures, pointing toward the car, toward the crossing, toward the crowd. But her words did not carry the same weight now. The system had already spoken louder. The maintenance crew stepped back from the control box after a quick inspection. One of them nodded toward the officer. That small motion carried everything. Evidence does not need volume. I leaned back in the seat, letting the moment settle fully. The rails had gone quiet now. No more hum. No more tension. Just stillness. The kind that comes after something almost breaks but does not. I looked at the distance between the train and the car one more time. Inches. Exact. Measured. That gap told the whole story. Not about speed. Not about force. About control. Real control. The kind that follows rules, not ignores them. I released the auxiliary control completely and held the brake in a neutral steady position. The system was stable again. Restored. I glanced once more at the crossing. The car still sat there, but it no longer felt like it held any power. It was just an object now. Out of place. Temporary. I exhaled slowly, the tension finally leaving my hands. Everything had held. The system. The timing. The line. And as the officers began to guide her away from the track, one thought stayed clear. Some lines are not meant to be crossed.